You know that feeling when you're just standing in the middle of the grocery store, right? And you're staring at a carton of eggs or like a standard loaf of bread?
Yeah, and you realize the price just went up again.
Exactly. We all see it happen. We feel it in our wallets. But what we almost never see is it's this invisible, highly precarious global Jenga game.
Oh, it's absolutely a massive game of Jenga.
Right, and it has to be played perfectly every single day just to put that food on your plate. But right now, a lot of the blocks at the bottom of that tower are being pulled out all at once.
Yeah, simultaneously. It's pretty alarming.
Which is exactly why we're taking you on this deep dive today. We really want to look past those grocery store aisles and, uncover the hidden vulnerabilities in the global food system.
And we have some really fascinating source material for this.
We do. We're pulling from a few different vantage points, everything from on-the-ground reporting by Sky News about these scorching fields in the UK to global climate data from the FAO and the World Meteorological Organization.
Right. And then zooming out to academic stress tests of international supply chains.
Exactly. Because our mission today is to find out what actually happens when the natural world and human engineering break down at the exact same time.
Because that's the real narrative here. It's a collision of two massive systemic stressors.
Two things failing at once.
Right. On one hand, you have this intense biological stress from unprecedented climate heat. And on the other, you've got chemical and geopolitical stress from, well, incredibly fragile fertilizer supply chains.
So let's actually start with that biological stress, literally at ground level. There's this really visceral example from West Sussex in the UK.
The Sky News report.
Yeah. So this farmer there recently dealt with 34 consecutive days above 30 degrees Celsius.
Which is just brutal for that region.
Brutal. He's standing in this field and the grass is completely scorched. His maize crop is severely dehydrated, really low grain count. And because there's just absolutely no grass left for his livestock to eat.
He has to dip into the winter feed.
Yes. In the middle of July, he's feeding them winter reserves in the summer.
And see, that triggers an immediate economic ripple effect. Because if you burn through your winter feed in the summer, you have to source emergency feed later on.
If you can even find it.
Exactly, assuming you can find it. So you pay a massive premium, your operating costs skyrocket, and, well, that cost inevitably gets passed on to the consumer. It's a direct physical line to food inflation.
Right. And looking at the global climate data from the FAO, that UK farmer is not an isolated case.
Not at all.
Europe is warming faster than anywhere else, but globally, we're seeing these climate-related yield shocks where crop production drops by up to 20%.
Which is a massive hit to the global food supply.
It's huge.
Yeah.
But I want to pause on the biology here for a second because I really need to understand the why. When things get too hot, how does a crop actually fail? I imagine it's something like, I don't know, leaving a wax candle in a hot car.
That's actually a really good analogy.
It doesn't just get warm, it physically loses its structural integrity. Right?
Yeah, that wax candle imagery gets right to the core of the mechanics. The FAO report talks about this concept called the thermal safety margin.
Okay, thermal safety margin.
Right, because every living thing, plants, animals, us, we all rely on a very specific temperature range to carry out basic cellular functions.
Right.
So when a plant pushes past 30 degrees Celsius, the proteins inside its cells literally start to unfold. They denature. The cell walls actually weaken.
So the plant is physically melting down at a microscopic level.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And it also completely messes with reproduction. At those higher temperatures, the pollen just becomes sterile.
Oh, wow. So it can't reproduce at all.
It physically cannot reproduce. And on top of that, the plant starts producing these toxic oxidative compounds in a panic response.
Yeah.
So the biology simply dismantles itself.
That is wild.
And that threshold is remarkably strict.
Yeah.
At 2 degrees Celsius of global warming, the intensity of this extreme heat roughly doubles. At 3 degrees, it quadruples.
Okay, so if the crops are melting down at 30 degrees, what is happening to the livestock? Because I imagine a cow standing in a scorched field doesn't fare much better.
No, they don't. For most livestock, severe stress begins right around 25 degrees Celsius.
Just 25.
Yeah, and the threshold is actually much lower for pigs and chickens.
Oh, because pigs and chickens can't sweat, right?
Exactly. They cannot sweat.
Yeah.
They have to rely on panting to expel heat, and that expends just a massive amount of energy.
Right. They're working overtime just to exist.
Precisely.
Okay.
And when animals are exposed to prolonged heat above that threshold, their bodies actually redirect blood flow. They pull it away from their digestive tracts and send it toward their skin to try and cool down.
Oh, so their digestion just stops?
Basically, they stop eating, which
Yeah.
leads to digestive breakdowns, organ failure, cardiovascular shock.
Jesus.
Yeah, and even in like non-lethal scenarios, a dairy cow, using all its energy just to stay cool, will produce significantly less milk. And the milk it does produce has much lower fat and protein content.
Which means we are getting less nutritional output for the exact same amount of feed and water input.
Exactly.
That inherently worsens the overall carbon footprint of animal-sourced foods. But if the land is baking, my mind immediately jumps to the oceans.
The oceans are taking a massive hit.
Because we rely on the sea for so much global protein, and water absorbs heat too. So are marine ecosystems hitting that same like thermal wall?
Yeah, the marine data is staggering. In 2024, 91% of the global ocean experienced a marine heat wave.
91%.
91%. And the mechanism here is all about oxygen. As water gets hotter, its physical capacity to hold dissolved oxygen gas just drops.
Oh, I see. So warm water physically cannot hold as much breathable air for the fish.
Precisely. The oxygen essentially just bubbles out, so the fish are swimming in water that is suffocating them.
That's horrifying.
It is. They start hyperventilating, struggling to maintain basic respiration, and that ultimately leads to mass cardiac failure.
So, okay, the animals are overheating, the fish are suffocating, and the crops are breaking down at a cellular level.
Yeah.
But biology rarely fails in isolation, right? The climate data points out that heat acts as this risk multiplier, creating like a cascading chain reaction.
No, absolutely. And there's a terrifying example of this from the spring of 2025 in Kyrgyzstan. They had this 30.8 degrees Celsius heat wave,
Okay.
which was a full 10 degrees above normal for that time of year.
Wow, a 10-degree jump above the baseline. That's a massive, sudden shock to a regional ecosystem.
Exactly. And it caused an immediate thermal shock to their fruit and wheat crops, damaging the cell walls, just like we talked about earlier.
The melting wax candle.
Right. But that anomalous heat also created the perfect breeding conditions for a massive locust outbreak.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And simultaneously, the heat caused intense water evaporation, which just crippled their irrigation reservoirs.
Well, they have thermal shock, a pest invasion, and severe drought all hitting at the exact same moment.
All at once. And the end result was a 25% decline in cereal harvest for the entire region.
Which is devastating. And, if natural biology is hitting a wall like this, if the soil and the weather are actively working against food production, it means we must be relying more than ever on human engineering, right?
To force the ground to produce, yes.
Right. We're chemically propping up the Jenga tower, which shifts us from biological stress to chemical stress, because if those artificial tools are just as fragile as the weather, we're in serious trouble.
And this brings us to the global reliance on synthetic fertilizer, specifically what's known as the Haber-Bosch process.
Let's actually pull from that academic scenario analysis we have, the one from the International Journal of Environmental and Agriculture Research, because they drop a statistic in there that, it actually made me stop reading and just stare at the wall.
It's a mind-blowing stat.
They estimate that without synthetic fertilizers, contemporary agriculture could only support half of the current global population.
Yeah. We apply roughly 190 million metric tons of synthetic nutrients to our soil every single year.
Wait, hold on. Let that sink in for a second. You're saying half the people on Earth, half the people we know, are essentially made of artificial factory-produced nutrients.
It's wild to think about, but yeah.
Like without human chemical intervention, 4.1 billion people on this planet simply would not have food to exist. We aren't just eating the food, we are fundamentally built by this industrial process.
That is the reality of modern agriculture.
Yeah.
We have literally hacked the carrying capacity of the earth.
Okay, but let me play the skeptic for a second, right? If we know we rely on this fertilizer, and we know exactly how to make it in our factories, why don't we just manufacture more of it whenever we need it? Like, what is the actual bottleneck here?
Well, the bottleneck is what agricultural economists call the geographic trap.
A geographic trap.
Yeah. Because we tend to talk about fertilizer as this one monolithic thing you just buy in a bag, right? But it's primarily three very different chemical nutrients: nitrogen, phosphate, and potash. And the raw materials required to make or mine those three nutrients are geographically concentrated in ways that make the entire global supply chain just incredibly vulnerable.
So walk us through that map. Where is this stuff actually coming from?
Okay, let's start with nitrogen,
Yeah.
which is the big one. It makes up about 59% of all fertilizer use globally.
Right, the majority.
Yeah. And we synthesize it using that Haber-Bosch process you mentioned, which literally pulls nitrogen gas out of the ambient air.
Which sounds like magic.
It does.
Nah.
But breaking the chemical bonds of nitrogen in the air requires immense heat and pressure. To achieve that, you need massive amounts of energy and chemical feedstock, which almost exclusively comes from natural gas.
Oh.
So global nitrogen production is permanently tethered to fossil fuel reserves and natural gas geopolitics.
So we are basically taking fossil fuels, turning them into plant food, and feeding ourselves with natural gas energy.
In a thermodynamic sense, yes, absolutely.
That's crazy.
Then you have phosphate, which crops desperately need for root development. Now, phosphate cannot be pulled from the air. It relies on mined rock.
And where is that rock?
A staggering 70% of the world's identified global reserves of phosphate rock are located in just one place,
Let me guess.
Morocco.
70% in Morocco alone.
Yep. And China controls a large chunk of the remaining workable reserves.
Okay.
Finally, you have potash, which is also a mined mineral. Historically, over 70% of all global exports for potash are controlled by just 3 nations: Canada, Belarus, and Russia.
Wow. You know, when you lay it out geographically like that, it completely changes the picture of farming.
It really does.
Like this triple concentration natural gas energy for nitrogen, phosphate geology locked up in North Africa, and potash geography centered in Eastern Europe and Canada. It means our food supply isn't really grown in our local farming communities.
No, it's not.
The actual roots of our agricultural system are anchored in distant, highly volatile geopolitical hotspots.
Which inherently means the global food supply is extremely susceptible to shipping choke points.
Right. And to test how fragile this logistical setup actually is, researchers frequently run stress tests. And the academic data we're looking at models a strictly hypothetical geopolitical conflict in the Middle East, specifically involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
Yes.
Now, I want to jump in here and just address you, the listener, directly. To be super clear, this isn't about predicting a war or validating any political sides. We are absolutely not taking any sides here.
Right, it's purely an academic exercise.
Exactly. It's just to run the math on what would happen to global shipping logistics and food prices if a major oceanic choke point were suddenly blocked.
And the geographical focal point of this stress test is the Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
It is essentially the main artery of global agriculture. It's this narrow waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, only about 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point.
33 kilometers is nothing for cargo ships.
It's a tiny bottleneck, but it handles 20% of all global liquid natural gas and an unbelievable 30% of the entire global fertilizer trade.
Okay, so if this hypothetical conflict shuts that strait down, what is the immediate day one physical impact on the supply chain?
It acts as an instant heart attack for global logistics. The model suggests that within a single month, Qatari urea exports, and urea is a highly concentrated solid nitrogen fertilizer, those exports would drop by 60 to 70%.
Just because their main shipping lane is closed.
Exactly. The transport ships that do manage to load cargo would have to abandon the Suez Canal route entirely. They'd have to route all the way around the southern tip of the African continent, navigating the Cape of Good Hope.
I mean, routing massive bulk carrier ships around an entire continent is not a trivial detour.
No, it adds up to 30 extra days of continuous travel for a single voyage.
30 days.
Yeah, and you're burning an astronomical amount of marine fuel to do that.
Yeah.
Furthermore, because these ships would be originating near an active conflict zone, the marine insurance premiums would just surge drastically.
Oh, of course. Risk goes up, insurance goes up.
The data models insurance rates jumping 7 to 9 times their normal rate. For a standard bulk carrier, the insurance alone for a single voyage leaks from about $12,500 to over $112,000.
That is a massive spike. But, this brings up a really fascinating paradox in the data.
How so?
Well, because you might look at this and think, well, the U.S. is a massive country with its own resources. We produce our own fertilizer. Like, the data clearly states the U.S. is the world's third largest nitrogen producer, right?
Yes, it is.
And we're a net exporter of DAP, diammonium phosphate, that crucial phosphorus mix. So if we're making this stuff domestically in North America, why does a farmer sitting in Iowa care if ships are stuck in the Strait of Hormuz?
Because fertilizer is a globally traded commodity, and we are completely subject to global price transmission.
Okay, explain that.
Well, even with completely uninterrupted domestic production inside the U.S., if you suddenly remove 30% of the world's supply from the international market by blocking that straight global buyers panic,
Right.
they start throwing money at whoever still has product to sell, bidding up the price everywhere.
Oh, I see. So a shortage in the Middle East instantly makes American fertilizer more expensive for American farmers.
Exactly. The scenario models that Middle Eastern urea prices would jump 19% and Egyptian urea jumps 28%. But remember, a conflict in the Strait of Hormuz also traps natural gas.
Right, the energy required to make the nitrogen.
Seriously. So if global energy markets panic, natural gas prices could spike to between $6.50 and $7 per MMBtu. And MMBtu is just the standard global unit we use to measure and price energy from gas.
Okay, and a spike to $7 is bad.
It's massive.
Yeah.
Because natural gas is the primary raw material used to manufacture nitrogen fertilizer. So domestic U.S. producers suddenly face skyrocketing operating costs just to run their own factories.
So what does all of this macroeconomic chaos actually look like for the person driving the tractor? Like, what is the impact on that Iowa farmer?
The paper estimates that a typical 500-acre corn farm in the American Midwest would suddenly face an extra $8,000 to $14,000 in input costs for a single growing season.
Wow.
Yeah, that represents a catastrophic hit to farm profitability margins. The farmer either absorbs that loss and risks bankruptcy, or they pass it up the chain and food prices explode.
Okay, so if an Iowa farmer, someone who lives in a wealthy country that actually manufactures and exports this chemical, if they're taking a $14,000 hit, what happens to a country that doesn't have its own factories?
Right, exactly.
Like what happens to a nation that relies entirely on importing this artificially created carrying capacity?
Well, that is where we look at a country like India. The academic paper identifies India as the most vulnerable giant in this entire geopolitical scenario.
Because of their population size.
Yeah, they have over 1.4 billion mouths to feed, but a severe lack of the natural resources required to make their own fertilizer.
The numbers regarding India's dependency are almost hard to wrap your head around, honestly. Like, their agricultural system consumes roughly 32.5 million tons of chemical nutrients annually.
It's a staggering volume.
But because they don't have the geology or the gas reserves, they have to import 94% of their potash, they import 58% of their DAP, and 23% of their urea.
Right. And because affordable fertilizer is quite literally a matter of national security and, well, preventing mass starvation, the Indian government heavily subsidizes the cost.
Oh, I didn't realize that. How much are they spending?
They spend roughly 21.6 billion US dollars, which translates to about 1.8 lakh crore rupees every single year, just to absorb the global market cost and keep urea cheap enough for local farmers to buy.
Wait, let's connect the math here because this is where the logistics become terrifying to me. You mentioned earlier that if the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, routing those bulk carrier ships around Africa takes 30 extra days, right?
Yes, 30 days.
But the data shows that India's strategic buffer, like their emergency national reserve for urea, is only 30 to 35 days.
You see the logistical collision course there.
If a blockade happens, India physically runs out of fertilizer before the diverted ships even arrive at their ports.
That is the exact mathematical reality, yes.
That's horrifying.
And if the supply chain crisis happens to hit right before their Kharif or summer planting season, it would directly jeopardize 140 million hectares of staple crops.
Good Lord.
But the vulnerability actually goes even deeper than just shipping times. The paper highlights this metric called nitrogen use efficiency, or NUE. India's NUE is currently sitting between only 30 and 35%.
Break that down for us. What does a 30% nitrogen use efficiency actually look like in the dirt?
It means that for every 100 kilograms of nitrogen fertilizer an Indian farmer purchases and applies to their field, the crops only successfully absorb about 30 to 35 kilograms.
Wait, so the rest is just...
The other roughly 70 kilograms are entirely wasted. It either washes away into the local watershed as toxic runoff, or it vaporizes back into the atmosphere as nitrous oxide, which is a really potent greenhouse gas.
So the Indian government is frantically spending tens of billions of dollars to import a product through a highly vulnerable naval choke point, only to have 70% of it literally wash down the drain or float into the sky.
Yes.
It is a breathtakingly fragile and inefficient system.
It really is.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. If the global climate is quite literally cooking our crops at a cellular level, and the artificial chemical supply chain we rely on is one naval blockade away from a total collapse, how do we actually adapt? Like, how do we hack this system to survive?
Well, the silver lining here is that we do have solutions, and the research outlines a pretty clear roadmap for adaptation. The absolute first step is radically improving that efficiency metric we just discussed.
Right. Stopping the waste.
Exactly. We have to do significantly more with significantly less.
So who is successfully doing that right now?
Israel is frequently highlighted as the gold standard for agricultural efficiency. Despite operating their agriculture in this harsh, arid desert environment, they utilize a technology known as fertigation.
Fertigation, like fertilization and irrigation.
You got it. It's the precise combination of drip irrigation networks mixed with carefully calibrated liquid nutrients.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right, because they are bypassing the surface dirt and delivering the exact microdose of food and water directly to the plant's root systems, their nutrient efficiency sits between 85 and 95%.
Wow. That is a massive operational leap from a 30% efficiency rate. So that solves the waste problem. But, it doesn't solve the geographic trap. We
Yeah.
still have to mine the rock and burn the natural gas, right?
We do.
So here's my question. If the Haber-Bosch chemical process is so vulnerable to geopolitics, why can't we just use biology to solve a biological problem? Like, can't we use nature to fertilize nature?
We absolutely can. And that is the frontier of what's called integrated nutrient and pest management, or INPM.
Okay.
Specifically, researchers are looking at the massive scale integration of biofertilizers. We can cultivate specific microorganisms in local vats to do the exact same nitrogen-fixing work that massive natural gas chemical plants do.
Seriously, give me a tangible example of a microbe replacing a factory.
Look at rhizobium bacteria. When this specific bacteria is properly applied to leguminous crops, things like soybeans or lentils, it actually forms a symbiotic relationship with the plant's roots.
Okay, so they work together.
Yeah, it creates these little nodules where the bacteria physically pull nitrogen directly from the ambient atmosphere and feed it to the plant. A healthy application can supply 100 to 150 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare.
Wait, that covers the entire nutritional requirement for the crop? So for soybeans, we could just completely turn off the chemical tap and let the bacteria do the work.
Under optimal soil conditions, yes, absolutely. And for non-legume staple crops like cereals and wheat, we can use plant growth promoting rhizobacteria or PGPR.
And what does that do?
Well, while it doesn't replace the entire chemical requirement for wheat, extensive field studies show it can cut synthetic nitrogen needs by 20 to 30% with absolutely no loss in final crop yield.
Cutting 30% of global nitrogen demand would instantly relieve an enormous amount of pressure on the natural gas supply chain.
Huge amounts of pressure. And on those shipping choke points, too.
Right. So if this biological technology exists and it works, why isn't every farmer on Earth utilizing it right now?
Well, because transitioning from inert chemicals to living biology requires a massive shift in infrastructure. Biologicals require careful handling. You're dealing with living organisms that sometimes require continuous refrigeration, specific moisture levels.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. They're alive. You can't just leave them in a hot shed.
Exactly. It requires an incredible amount of localized farmer education. It is vastly more complicated than just tearing open a bag of dry chemical dust and throwing it on a field.
So what do global governments need to do right now proactively before one of these geopolitical or climate stress tests becomes a permanent reality?
There are two critical policy shifts required. First, nations need to build strategic fertilizer reserves.
Like we do for oil.
Just like countries maintain strategic petroleum reserves to stabilize energy markets, we need nutrient reserves. The paper explicitly states India needs to build its emergency urea buffer from 30 days up to a minimum of 90 or 120 days.
To give them that safety net.
Right. And the U.S. needs to establish a dedicated potash reserve, considering North America still imports an enormous amount of its total supply.
Okay, and the second policy shift.
Governments must actively fund the transition away from chemical dependency. The research actually highlights India's PM Pranam scheme as an excellent template.
What does that do?
It's a government initiative that financially rewards local states that actively document a reduction in their consumption of chemical fertilizers and instead adopt these alternative biological inputs.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, if we want to survive the bottleneck, we have to subsidize the biological transition rather than just endlessly subsidizing the chemical vulnerability.
Absolutely. So, what does this all mean for you listening right now? The next time you're navigating the aisles at the grocery store looking at the fluctuating price of a loaf of bread, I hope you can visualize that vast, invisible Jenga tower holding that aisle up.
It's all connected.
It is. We want you to think about the scorching, dusty fields in the UK pushing biological cellular limits, the natural gas reserves in the Middle East dictating chemical prices in Iowa, and, the microscopic root bacteria that might just be the key to saving our agricultural future.
And there's actually one final, rather provocative thought to leave you with. It synthesizes a data point from the FAO climate report that truly puts our long-term future into perspective.
Lay it on us.
The climate models note that with rising baseline temperatures in vital agricultural regions like South Asia, tropical sub-Saharan Africa, and parts of the Americas, it will soon be physically too hot for human beings to safely work outdoors for up to 250 days a year.
250 days. That is the vast majority of the calendar year where a human simply cannot stand in a field.
Exactly, which raises a massive existential question.
Right.
If outdoor agricultural labor becomes biologically impossible due to lethal heat, and outdoor chemical farming becomes geopolitically unaffordable due to supply chain conflicts, are we inevitably heading toward a future where our staple crops are forced entirely out of the soil?
Wow.
Like, will we be pushed to abandon traditional fields and move our agriculture into automated, climate-controlled indoor biofactories just to maintain that carrying capacity?
Will the very definition of what a farm is have to change entirely for us to survive?
That's the question we're facing.
That is a staggering thought to chew on. The global Jenga tower might not just need rearranging. We might be rapidly approaching a point where we have to build a completely different game from scratch. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the hidden systems operating around you, and we'll catch you next time.